Hi there, this is the second of my videos where I'm going to continue to work on this report that I built in my last video. So this is my COVID case fatality report, which I built for Australia, and I downloaded some data from a website and then I loaded it up and I built this report, and you can watch my video from last week if you'd like to have a look at that. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to go through the process of continuous improvement, because this is often the way it works. The first version of your report is rarely the last version. It's like your baby. Your baby is born, but it needs to grow up. It needs to become more mature and more responsible in the world. And so I'm going to continue to build out this report. I'll do this video. We'll see how we go. I might do a couple more in future weeks as well, just see how we progress. And so as far as the stuff that I want to cover, so this is what I'm going to do. So originally when I built this report, it was a downloaded CSV from the web. And of course, because it's a manual process to download the CSV, then that's created work. And so I'm going to repoint this report so that it points live to an online version of the data. I'm going to improve a couple of the visualizations. There are a few issues that I noticed after building the report. I'm also going to remove the Excel file. So what I did last time I did this video is I built this Excel file containing the phases, and I'm going to get rid of that Excel file because that'll make it easier for me to publish the report to powerbi.com and then set auto refresh without having to worry about that Excel file. So I'm going to do that. I'm also going to build a lead lag adjustment. Now, this was the suggestion that was on my blog from last week. I'll show you that when I get to that topic, and I'll show you how I'm going to solve that problem and take that idea and deploy it within my report. And I'm also going to just expand the report so that anyone can select any country. I've loaded all the data for all countries, so why not make that available for everyone? So they're the 5 things that I'm going to be doing in this video today. So let's head over to the report and get started. All right, so here's my report. I've basically just taken a copy of the report from last week. I've called it version 2. I will share this report on my blog once I've finished, so you can have a look at what I've done. All right, so if I go in here now, remember I loaded the data from a CSV, so I'm going to jump into transform data. Remember I created this staging table, and in fact if you come up here and look at the query dependency view, this is a great way of actually understanding what's going on with your data. So you can see here that I have this file, which is the CSV, and that loads into this staging table, which is here, and then I build my star schema, my country table and my data table, and then I have this second file. This is the phases Excel that I mentioned before. I want to get rid of that so that I don't have to go through this. And so once I'm finished, there'll be no local file connections inside Power Query. Now, the best way to repoint a data source, if you've got a data source pointing in one place and you want to completely change it and point it to another source, the best way to do that is to build a new connection to the new source and then take that connection and retrofit it back into the original source. I'm going to show you how to do that. So I'll jump over here onto the web. This is my source data. If I navigate here through to COVID and click on this Data Explorer, in fact what I did was I clicked here, and if you come in here, I can click on this CSV link, and then I can download the file here. In fact, I actually did go ahead and download this file onto my hard drive. But if you look at what's on the screen now, this is actually a web-based version of that same CSV file. Now, I didn't discover this the first time round, which is why I didn't do it this way to start with, but hindsight's a great thing. And so what I've realized is that there is this web-based version of this CSV file that is available, and it's updated on a regular basis. And so if I can connect to this web source rather than my downloaded CSV, then I can set it to refresh automatically and I don't have to touch it. So I'm going to copy this URL, Control C, and as I mentioned, the best way to repoint a query is to start from scratch and then retrofit what you've built back into the original query. So best with a demo. So I'll create a new query. This time it's from web, and I'll paste my URL, and let's have a look at what happens. Okay, it inspects the file. I'll just click OK. So here's my new query. And in actual fact, it's pretty much done everything that I wanted. It connected to the source. Notice that there's a couple of steps here. Power Query did all that for me. I didn't need to tell it anything. It promoted the headers, which is correct. It changed the data type, which is also correct. So at this point in time, I've got a nice table that has these headers and a whole lot of data down the row. Now, if I go back to my original source, let's have a look at that one. This time the source connected to a local file. It then promoted the headers and it then changed the data type. Now, it's not always this clean cut, but in this case, the 3 steps that I originally produced delivers the identical table as the 3 steps on my second attempt of loading the data, which is using the web source. And therefore, the source code that makes this table, all I need to do is take that source code and retrofit it inside the original table. Now, you can't delete this and rename this one. That's not going to work. So what you have to do is I'm going to click on this new query, go to the advanced editor and copy all the code, Control C. I know this code produces the correct table. And then I'll come up to this query, right click, advanced editor, and I'll just replace all of the code that generates the new table with the original code that generated the original table. And when I do that, I've now got a brand new connection with exactly the same name as before. And importantly, if I come into the dependencies view, this query now is no longer pointing to a local file, it's now pointing to the web. And so if you want to change your source, that's the way to do it. So now I've done that, I can actually delete this version that I created. I created a brand new one just to recreate the steps to get my table to the same data point. Once I did that, I obviously copied it and pasted it across. And so now I've basically repointed my data source to where I need it to be. So with that change, I'll go File, Close and Apply. And we'll just let that refresh. Notice the data here was the 17th of July. It's a few days ago. The data is lagging by a couple of days. It depends on what time of day you do the refresh. It depends which time zone you're in, of course. You can see there's 3 million rows of data, so the data's been updated by 2 days. And so you can see that there's been another death that's come in to Australia. There was a person that passed away in their 50s, I think, in the last day. All right, so I've now repointed that. So the second thing I wanted to do was just improve this visualization here. I noticed that this conditional formatting, this dark red with this black text is very hard to see, and particularly when I took screenshots and things like that. So I just want to go ahead and make a change there. So I'll come up here, go into format, I'll come down to conditional formatting, case fatality rate, conditional formatting, background color, and I'm just going to change the highest value. Let me come in here. Let's just try and find something a little bit less severe. Really, it's up to you what you pick, but I just want something a little bit not quite as dark, so that that's probably, I'll try that. Let's give that a go. And I think that's better. It's just easier to read. And so this is also part of the continuous improvement, improving the way your report looks, so it makes it easier for your end users to read. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to break the link with that Excel file. So this is similar but different to what I did with the repointing to the web. So if I come back into transform data and come to the phases, you recall, if you've watched the video, that I've actually loaded these phases from an Excel file. So let me go ahead and open that Excel file. Okay, so here's the file that I produced before. It's an Excel file. I gave it a table name and I loaded it up. But I want to break the dependency on this Excel file. Now look, I could put a gateway in place, or I could save my file in OneDrive and then point the file to OneDrive. But this is not going to change that much, or certainly not at this stage. And so I'm going to come up and I'm just going to copy the data from the Excel sheet, come back here, and then I'm going to use the same process as I did before. I'm going to start from scratch. So let me go enter data. I'm going to paste my table, and I'll just leave it called table. I'll click OK. And so here's my new table of data. This is the phases table that I used before. Now this time I need to do something a little bit different. So let's take a look. The table that I now cut and paste looks like this. So it's got 4 rows and 3 columns. If I come back to my query here and go back to the source, I connected to the source. There was a navigation step, and then there's a change type step. So it's at this point here, this changed type step, that this table looks identical to this table. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace these first 3 steps in my old query with the steps in my new query so that I can repoint the data to the new source. So to do that, I'm going to come into this one and go into the advanced editor, copy these 2 lines of code, because these 2 lines of code generate the table that I need. So Control C, and then I'm going into this one, advanced editor, and I have to replace these 3 lines of code with those 2 lines of code. So I'm going to paste my code in here. Now it's throwing some errors. This always happens. I need to put a comma at the end. And the other thing I need to do is I now need to join these 2 new steps with the rest of the query. And the way to do that is this 3rd step says perform a function table.replace values and grab the data from the previous step. And the previous step used to be called changed type. And by coincidence, the previous step is still called changed type. It doesn't often happen that way. So normally what I would have to do is I'd have to take the name of this step, which is the last one that I copied from the other query, and I would need to update it here so that the 3rd step refers to the 2nd step. In this case, by coincidence, they have the same name. So that should be it. I just click done. And now I've got a brand new query, and all of the other query steps work because I did basically a cut and join halfway through the query to reroute the source. And if I come back here now to query dependencies, you'll see that I've got this table now coming from Excel, which is not being used. And now I've got my phases, which is being loaded directly from within Power BI Desktop. And so now I've done that, I can come down here. In fact, this is the version that I did, so I can just delete that. And so I can't even see the join now. So if I come back in here, there's absolutely no reference to that Excel file. And this phases was generated within Power Query itself. So with that, I'll just go File, Close and Apply. And I've now completely broken all of the steps that join to the Excel file and the CSV file that was stored on my hard drive. And so now this is a completely standalone Power BI desktop file. If I publish it to powerbi.com, I can set it to auto refresh, and I'll do that shortly. All right, so the next thing I want to look at is this lead lag issue. And you'll recall if you watched the last video that I created this days into phase because I was aware that the curve for the cases is a lead indicator for the curve for the deaths that sometimes follow thereafter. And what I did in my previous video was I was to work out how many days into the phase to basically do that calculation so that I could see whether we should be experiencing the same sorts of lift in deaths at this point in time. But there was a very good comment that came in from Duncan on my blog article. There were quite a few comments on this original blog article, and this really got me thinking. You know, Duncan looks like he might have a bit of a statistics background, and he was looking into the data, and he sort of thought maybe it's a 36-day lag. But this actually got me thinking, because rather than worry about what is the start of the phase, maybe I should try and align these curves. And basically what I mean by that is to build in a lead lag variable which allows me to move the curve so it aligns. So let me show you what I had in mind. If I could move this dark blue curve to the left, I could try and align it with the light blue curve and therefore work out where there is a natural fit. It's still going to be a visual indication, but I just thought it was a better approach. So let me show you how to do that. So I'm going to build this lead lag slider, which allows me to move those curves. And so I think what I'll do is I'll do a new measure for deaths. I'll call this new deaths lag. And so this is going to lag by a number of days. And so I need to do a time shift. And so to do that, I'm going to use calculate new deaths. But before I do the calculation, I want to do a time shift. So this is a form of a time intelligence calculation. And so the function I'm going to use is called dateAdd. And as you can see from the IntelliSense, it moves the given set of dates by a specified interval. And so to demonstrate the point, let's just write this out. So whenever you're using a time intelligence function and it asks for dates, it always means where's the calendar table date column. And so that's, in my case, it's called calendar date. And now it's saying how many intervals do you want to move and what type of interval is it? So this is exactly what I did. So I don't know, let's move it 36 days. So back 36. So I do minus 36 days. And let's just have a look at what that does. So I'll apply that, bring it into my chart, and I'll remove the original deaths. And you can see that I've actually moved it the wrong way. So I've just done a hard code. And so in fact, minus 36 is wrong. I should do plus 36. So let's have a look at that. And now it's actually moved it too far. So of course I could say, well, let's do 28 and so on. So you can see that by me moving those numbers in the dateAdd function, I'm actually able to move the deaths forward or backwards in time. And so what's actually happening inside this formula is the calculation is still the same calculation, but when it gets displayed in the chart, it gets displayed at a different point in time. And in that sense, I'm able to actually improve the way I can visualize the data. But as you may or may not realize, it's not good practice in Power BI to hard code these measures. You can certainly do it inside Power BI Desktop, but once you publish this to powerbi.com, you won't be able to change these measures at all. And so the built-in way to do that is by creating what's called a parameter. And so my numbers, my lag numbers, have to be a positive number. So I'm going to create a new parameter and I'll call it lag. And it'll be a whole number starting from 0. I don't know what the right number is. Let's go up to 36, which was the number suggested by Duncan. I'll start with an increment of 0 and I'll set the default to 0. And I'll leave this add slicer to page. And what happens is a few things. First of all, if I jump over here, you'll see that there's a brand new table that's been generated with the numbers from 0 to 36. If I jump to this view, you'll see that this new table is not connected to anything, which is correct. If I jump to the table, you'll see that there's a measure called lag value. So this is the actual calculation. And basically what this measure says is, as long as there's a single value selected for lag, then tell me what that value is. Otherwise, give me 0. And you can see that I've got this slicer here. So I'm just going to make some space for this slicer. I'll put it up here for now. Let's do this. I might just bring it down so I can see the word lag. And I can improve this. It's you can actually do a cut and paste of formatting. So if you click on any object, this has got a light grey border and a shadow. I'm selecting that object. I can do Format Painter Paste. So even though these are two different objects, you can copy common properties between those things. And so now what happens is that as I move this slider, the number changes. In this case, it's the lag number. And so I'm able to insert this number inside my formula. So if I come back to my new deaths lag, instead of referring to a hard-coded number, I can use this lag value measure. So square brackets, lag value. And then as you can see, I'm able to use this slider to move my deaths back and forth. And in fact, I've already done this. And if you look here as we get closer, if I set the lag to 19, that looks pretty close to me. You can see that there's a sort of a bit of an alignment of the pattern here, another pattern here. You could argue whether it's 19 or maybe it's 20. It doesn't really matter. I seem to think 19 looks right to me. And so I'm now going to include that in part of my report. And so now this report is actually showing me something different. It's not showing me new cases and deaths. The deaths are lagged by 19 days. And so really what I think I should do is I should change the title of this chart so it clearly communicates what it is that this chart is showing me. And so to do that, I'm going to write a new measure, and it's arguable where I would place that, but I'll put it in the data table, and I'll call this chart title. And I'm basically going to build a text string that will react to what's happening inside my report. And so this will be total cases and deaths. And then what I'm going to do is something like this: lagged by, and then how many days is it? Well, to know how many days it is, I have to extract the value from this, which is the lag value, and then I concatenate that together with another closed bracket. In actual fact, it'll probably say lagged by 19 space days. Let's just try that. Let's see what that does. So there's my new chart title. You normally have to sort of do a bit of trial and error on these. And so I've got my chart title. I'm clicking here on the chart. I'll come down to title. Anywhere you see this FX, it means you can use expression-based formatting. So I click here, and I'm going to find my measure called chart title. This chart title must return a text string for this to work. So click OK. And so now so it says total cases and deaths lagged by 19 days. And if I change this, the chart updates to tell me how many days that's lagged by. So I think that's a nice improvement over the standard chart title that I had before. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to do on this version of the report is I'm going to change the country, or make it available to be changed. So if I come here into the filters pane, I've already got a filter on all pages, being country is Australia. And because all of the data is loaded, I can actually come in here and find any country I want. So if I go to United Kingdom, let's take a look at United Kingdom. Notice that this is actually the pattern that I'm trying to understand whether this pattern is going to be repeated in Australia. And now when I switch to United Kingdom, there's actually an issue here because I've got 0, these axes aren't aligned. So I need to fix that. So I'll come back to the chart, go back to the y-axis. So this one's starting at 0, but I forgot to set the other one at 0, I think. So that's the column. Sometimes I find these things a little bit hard to find. Oh, there it is. I just didn't go down. So I'll set the line to start at 0 well. So that looks better. So you can see that there were deaths way above the line here. Now, of course, the question is the alignment right for the UK? So we could just do a bit of moving around left and right here. They're not a perfect fit. Look, I could speculate what's going on here. In fact, 20 looks like maybe it's a better fit for the UK. And look, it could be that just some historical fact needs to be taken into account here. So with the UK was one of the early countries to be affected pretty badly by COVID. And if you look at the test rates down here, they were quite low. So this was in the very early days of the pandemic. So probably didn't even have protocols in place for doing a lot of testing amongst the community. So that would explain, I think, why the deaths were so much higher than the testing rates here. But by the time we get to the second wave, you can see that with this lag shift of 20 days, that this looks about right. But it's clear here that with this third wave, there is nowhere near the number of deaths that are following the cases. But what's not clear is what causes that. Is it because it's the Delta strain? Is it because of the high level of vaccination? Is it because of the high level of vaccination amongst older people? Is it because there's better protection in the community. These questions are unanswered, but the data doesn't lie. The data is telling us that the case fatality rate is much lower in the UK now than it was in the worst scenario, which happens to be the first one. I guess to do a better comparison, it would be better to use this second phase, which was perhaps a bit more standardized around the world, as the starting point. And I might go back at some stage and hard code this calculation. So instead of it working off the worst phase, it works off the second phase, wherever that was. But that's a future improvement that I might consider doing. Because I'm now switching countries, what I really should do is update this chart title again to pick up the country that I've selected. So let me come back to the chart title, and total cases and deaths, I might go in, and then I'll do some concatenation. I need an open bracket there, and this will be selected value of the location. So as long as there's a single value in the location, it'll extract that value. And then I concatenate that, and I'm going to need a space there. So let's have a look at that. So that's a nice title, total cases and deaths in the United Kingdom lagged by 20 days. If I come back here and switch to Australia and change my lag back to 19 days, you can see that that chart title is updated, and so that looks pretty good. The other thing is I've hard-coded Australia up here. This is a text box. And I don't believe it's possible to do expression-based formatting using one of these things. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something a little bit strange. So let me copy that, Control-C, and I'll delete that text box. And I'm going to add, of all things, a button. Now, you might ask, why am I adding a button? Well, as it turns out, it's one of the few things that you can control pretty carefully. So if I come in here and I'll go turn on the button text, and I'll place that in there. And notice that this button text has expression-based formatting. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a new measure, and I'll call this my report title. And that will be basically the text. The COVID case fatality rate in, I now need to specify the country, so it'll be ampersand selected value of the location, same as I did before, another ampersand. Maybe I won't put pi phase in there, I'll just do that. So let's have a look at what that does. I've got my report title. I'll change my button text based on the report title. And I might be able to increase the font size. And I'll just take up a bit of space. Just a little bit of formatting up here. I'll change vertical alignment. That can stay like that. Text is fine, and then I'll just resize this so that it meets my requirements. And so now I've got this that updates. So if I come over and if I pick another country, so I'll just pick, say, Austria instead of Australia, you can see that that updates automatically, and you have to select a single country in the case of this particular chart. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to publish this to powerbi.com. So let me click publish. It always asks you to save it first, which is probably a good thing. It's important that you have the page that you want visible once you've published as the selected page. And I'll put it into my workspace, but I will actually share this publicly on the web. So I'll put it into my workspace now for this video. So that will copy the file up onto the web. As soon as that is complete, I'll get a link which takes me to that page. So click on that link. And if I expand this section down here, come down and find my new report. Here's the report, here are the data sets, and I can click here and select schedule refresh. Come down to schedule refresh, turn on the refresh, and I'm going to refresh it every day. I'm not quite sure what time the data becomes available, so I'm going to do it 3 times a day. I'll do it at 7, 12 noon, must be PM, and I might do it 7 PM at night. Once I understand in my local time zone what time the data gets updated, I could probably set this so that it only refreshes once a day or maybe twice a day. And so that's it. It's now set up for auto refresh, and I can actually now share this publicly. So if I click here on the report, I'll come up here, File, Embed Report, and I'm going to use this Publish to Web. This is the only sharing that you can use with the free version of Power BI Desktop. So anyone can do this. You can publish a report to your personal workspace, and then you create this embed code. It gives you a few warning messages, which just basically says this is not securely shared. It's shared in an unsecure way. I can either copy that link and email it, or I can copy this embed code. And in fact, that's exactly what I did to make this report available inside my blog article from today. Okay, so that's it for this week. I may do a few more improvements on this workbook in the next couple of weeks. The thing that is really troubling me at the moment is that I've effectively made this workbook so that it can be used for any country, yet these phases that I set up have been specifically hard-coded for Australia, and there's really no way to change those phases the way I've currently built this report. So I'm going to give that a little bit of thought over the next week or so, and I might come back and do another video where I change the way those phases are entered so that anyone can come in and pick one or more phases based on the country they're looking at, and then actually get these calculations correctly calculating for the country of interest.